Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, a movie that mostly just reminds you how shitty old TV was. It's The Cable Guy.
Let's go!
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I'm Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like The Cable Guy, which we're talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you?
Well, you remember last week I said I was reaching a hand out to touch the spring sunshine in the hopes that it would lift me out of the winter of my discontent?
Sure.
Well, the rain came back.
Oh, no.
No sun this week, so I'm just sitting in my discontent.
Are you sure the saying is not discount tent? Maybe you were supposed to go to like a sporting goods store and...
I feel like somehow that would be worse.
Yeah. No, we've swapped weather for the week, it would appear, because it's supposed to be cold and rainy in New England this time of year, but instead it was 93 degrees today. But then next week it's going back down to the low 50s.
It's a little known fact that 1 week after Good Friday is Freaky Friday.
It's true. It's how it goes. I'm hoping this crazy weather will cause the mosquitoes to come out and be like, yeah, my time to shine, baby. But then when it gets down to like 33 degrees overnight next week, they all just die.
Just frozen in their little puddles.
Good. I'm going to piss on them. I don't know what it is. Mosquitoes fucking love me. It's April. I already have 5 mosquito bites on my right arm.
Man.
I don't know what it is. I'm not diabetic. I don't know if that even is a thing. Or is that like an old wives' tale?
I thought it was gases. I thought it was like CO2 that attracts them.
You're saying I'm gassy?
You might be just a little bit gassy.
So I guess people that run hot attract them, and that would make sense for me.
Oh, okay.
Warm.
They're seeing your heat signature like some kind of predator.
That's what actually what a mosquito looks like zoomed in. It just looks like the fucking predator. Yeah, it's terrible. It's super warm. We did not prepare for this at all. So my office has no fans or AC running. It's just 83 degrees in here all day. So if I sound annoyed during this recording, it's because I did not enjoy watching this movie. Yeah. And I'm also quite warm.
It's understandable. The movie didn't do you any favors. Weather's not helping. Let's try to bring our own positive energy to this week's episode.
In that spirit, did you happen to watch anything this week you thought would be fun to share with the listeners?
I did. I watched something that I thought was real positive. I'm expanding on a little mini theme here. The theme is undeniable action films of 2014. Ooh. Last week I brought Edge of Tomorrow. And this week I decided to go back and rewatch John Wick, the original one. I think we brought it up even that episode 4 is out. The Ballerina spinoff movie, this Continental TV prequel spinoff show is coming. So I'm like, okay, now it's time. I got to go back, watch the old John Wicks just so I can enjoy the latest chapters in the Wikiverse. And so it's been a while since I've seen it. It's more stylish and reserved and classy than I remembered it being, which is cool. It starts with the action movie version of a wordless losing your wife montage that pretty much rivals Up. Like I was crying by the end of this thing right along with Keanu. Yeah. It's pretty strong. They don't say a word for the first 10 minutes of the film and you're like, oh shit, this is rough.
With our old pal Bridget Moynihan playing the sadly deceased Helen Wick. Is that her name?
Yeah, she took a break from gunrunner Nicolas Cage in Lord of War and came over to hang out with Keanu, and that didn't work out well for her.
Do you think it's because John Wick gets his guns from Yuri Orlov and that's how they met?
Ooh, that would be a fun, like, extended universe kind of thing. How did they come together?
That brings me to the point about John Wick I wanted to say is that I think the first one is still the best one because it kind of hints at those interconnected universe things, the deeper world that lies in the Continental. Like, it's gotten a little too spelled out and a little too contrived in the later series with the high table and all these kind of this global network. You know, it seemed a little more, not plausible, but like a little more grounded in the first one.
I would agree that they kind of left more to the imagination. So you're like, what's the deal with the Society of Assassins? They have some rules and they have some coins, but we don't know much more than that. And it's just kind of cool that way. And you don't have to spell it all out and belabor it.
That's the thing. It's become belabored.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen 4 yet, but from what I understand, it kind of continues that theme. So they're still highly enjoyable, but I think the first one will always be special.
It's a good movie. And I think because it takes its time and it moves slowly, there's no action. It doesn't do the reveal of who he is, who he was, until more than 15 minutes in when shit starts to go wrong. And I think that really helps balance it because a lot of the rest of the movie is over the top slam bang action. But the movie overall feels a little more balanced and classy because they didn't hit you over the head with it from the first frame.
I love the slow buildup of everyone realizing how badly they fucked up by messing with John Wick. Because like when John Leguizamo slaps the Alfie Allen character and then he gets the phone call, you're like, I don't know, that stuff is just played really well.
Totally agree. Those are some of the best parts of the movie. And Leguizamo carries his little piece of that really nicely.
I also saw a high action movie about one man on a quest for revenge.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, he's got to go down some pipes he hasn't been down. I watched the Super Mario Brothers movie this weekend. Me and my sister took my son. He's a huge Mario fan. We play Super Mario 3 most nights together before bed. It was like a little thing. He's been waiting for this movie for a long time. His first movie ever in theaters was Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which he really loved. I can talk about it on this podcast. And this is only his second one. We haven't been to anything since. There was a few movies he was interested in, but nothing like this. So we watched it. It's breezy. Like it had the opposite effect of when you're like, how much time's left in this movie? Watch, where it was like, is it wrapping up already? Wow. And I don't think it's particularly short. It just has a really breakneck pace, but not in a fatiguing way. It's just like something's always happening, which is clearly a useful tool to keep kids interested.
That's good. Kids filmmaking.
It was a theater packed full of kids, and there was not a lot of bored chatter or acting out. Everybody was pretty much into it the whole time, and it was funny. I'm not the biggest Chris Pratt fan. I think we kind of reached market saturation with him a long time ago, but he does a good job here, and they do explain the accent and give diehard fans a little taste of it in the beginning.
Okay.
I won't spoil it or anything, but then the rest of the voice cast is just awesome. Anya Taylor-Joy playing Princess Peach, Keegan-Michael Key, your boy, playing Toad, Jack Black playing Bowser, and Charlie Day as Luigi. Like that's just Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. The Seth Rogen laugh makes an appearance that got a big reaction from the crowd.
Excellent.
It's not gonna change your life. It's not even Wreck-It Ralph, another video game movie that seemed like it was really trying to connect with audiences on an emotional level and had some real stakes to it. This is just pure hijinks from beginning to end. It's a different type of movie. Not to say it doesn't have heart, but it doesn't tug at your heartstrings really.
Okay.
Which is like a strange thing for animated films now. We're so used to them kind of having this tragic aspect to them.
Going so hard. And we just mentioned Up is like one of the most painful moments in modern cinema. And it's a fucking animated kids movie. But yeah, it's kind of fun to remember that they don't all have to be like that. They can just be fun and exciting and entertaining.
So I would say if you have kids or if you're a Mario fan, it's worth your time.
Cool.
So let's talk about The Cable Guy, Ian.
We're
here to talk about The Cable Guy this week. I mentioned I watched this movie a lot as a kid. Now I'm a little concerned with how unsupervised I was as a child. That I was allowed to watch this movie as like a 7-year-old. Oh no, I guess I was like a 10-year-old. So a little better. But I know you mentioned you had never seen it because you were kind of out on Jim Carrey when this came out. But do you remember the hubbub about it at the time?
I'm not sure if I remembered how it was received. I can remember personally hearing about it and probably just being turned off, both by the concept and by Jim Carrey in general, and like the way those two things play together. Because he plays a nasty character in this movie, and it was definitely apparent even through the TV spots and the trailers. So like, do I want to see Jim Carrey just being an obnoxious ass for a couple hours? And so I guess I decided then that I didn't, never saw it. And even though like I've warmed up to Jim Carrey a lot, obviously he's had some really interesting roles and stretched himself, but whatever goodwill that has built up in me for Jim Carrey, I never warmed up to this movie until now. And now that I've seen it, I have still not warmed up to it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's an exceedingly nasty movie. Its sole purpose seems to be to make you uncomfortable and almost queasy. It wants you to be tense at all times, which isn't what you look for in your breezy studio comedy. And I know that's by design. You know, they were trying to kind of undercut the public perception of Jim Carrey at the time. But sure, that's like a clever little idea, but you still got to make a movie.
Yeah, like I'm not against movies that tweak you and make you very uncomfortable, whether that's through the social situations that they depict, which is what this movie tries to do, and actually does well in a few scenes. I'll try to point that out where I think it's actually succeeding at something that it's trying to do. But there's movies that make you uncomfortable with their gross out nature. The Farrelly brothers pushed our comfort levels, but also made us laugh and also brought us home with characters that we liked. And this movie is all about pushing the buttons and doesn't end up leaving you with anybody to grab onto and like, root for, feel things about. It's kind of all just assaulting you.
Yeah, I would love to pick Judd Apatow's brain because apparently Lou Holtz Jr. did the first draft and a couple of rewrites, but then left the project pretty early on, and Judd Apatow kind of wrote the script that we ended up getting. He took it to arbitration to try to get credit, but was denied. I would like to ask him, though, if it was his intention to have no likable characters in this movie. And I don't mean that like pejoratively. I'm not being sarcastic.
Yeah.
But like legitimately, even the Matthew Broderick character, he kind of sucks. Robin, kind of an asshole. Steven's friend Rick, played by Jack Black, kind of a dick.
Or just really kind of shallow.
Well, he would become Shallow Hal later.
Oh,
see?
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing.
You know, I have some theories about how the movie ended up that way, and I think my theories are explained by the way the movie came together. So maybe we should talk about how it got made, and that'll start to give us clues on what's on screen.
Hey, that's my line.
Oh, sorry.
All right, let's get into it. Lou Holtz Jr. Nope, not that guy. Nope, not that guy either. We're talking about the actor Lou Holtz's son. Lou Holtz Jr. was working as a prosecutor in Los Angeles when he saw a cable company employee working kind of late and thought, oh, that's weird. So he wrote an entire movie about that, and it became a hot commodity among movie studios, starting a bidding war that ended with a script being sold to Columbia Pictures for $750,000, with another $250,000 to be paid if the movie ever got made. Judd Apatow was brought in to produce the film, titled The Cable Guy, and was keen on directing it, but was rebuffed by the studio. Apatow's suggestion to direct was Ben Stiller, who was already being considered for the co-lead role of Stephen Kovacs. Chris Farley was signed to play the titular Cable Guy, but was forced to drop out due to a contractual obligation to star in Black Sheep.
You remember that? That was awesome.
Adam Sandler was then considered for the role, but ultimately they signed the hottest comedic actor in the world, Jim Carrey, for a then record $20 million salary, which is almost half the film's $47 million budget.
Well, alrighty then.
Matthew Broderick was offered the role of Kovacs, and the movie production was underway. Filmed between November 1995 and March 1996 in various locations around Los Angeles, the movie had a decidedly darker tone than most of Carrey's past hits. Stiller even filmed most scenes involving the Cable Guy character twice, with one take leading into the more disturbing side of the character and another being more lighthearted.
That's crazy. A studio would never be into the darker takes.
To his surprise, the studio was into the darker takes.
Oh, okay.
With a blockbuster release date of June 14th, 1996 set, the studio clearly had high hopes, but it was not meant to be. Critics were mostly split on it, as it sits at 55% on Rotten Tomatoes, and audiences did not turn out for it in the numbers the studio was banking on. It opened with a respectable $19.8 million, but saw its legs cut out from under it as The Nutty Professor premiered and became a surprise breakout hit only 2 weeks after The Cable Guy was released. It would eventually earn $102 million worldwide, making it at least a disappointment if not an outright bomb, but the movie has become a fan favorite in the years since, and I will add, for some fucking reason.
I think a lot of the story is in that casting. Can you imagine this movie with Chris Farley? Suddenly there's a likable Cable Guy. There's a Cable Guy who is problematic, weird, obnoxious, but kind of sad and relatable. And even Adam Sandler could pull that off. But Carrey, as you said, not only did they decide to go with him, who has more of a... He falls into the off-putting version of the obnoxious comedy character more easily, but then they leaned into it. They're like, oh, let's go darker. And so they pushed the movie away from its possible humanity.
Yeah, I think Sandler at the time was still probably considered obnoxious comedy, and rightfully so.
Yes.
A lot of his early roles kind of were man babies, but there's an innocence to him that I feel like Carrey lacks, which could have played in his favor, because even though you get some backstory on Chip and why he's all fucked up, you still get the sense that he's like an adult making choices, and I don't know you would have gotten that vibe from Sandler.
That's a perfect encapsulation of how Sandler can undercut his rough, obnoxious side, is because you're like, but this dude really is a kid, and it may be annoying, but like you can't blame him too much. Whereas Carrey doesn't read as childlike at all.
He plays Chip as fairly capable and intelligent too, which I think makes him more unlikable because it takes away from that idea like, oh, he's just in a state of arrested development. He can't move on from his childhood. But no, like there's several spots in the movie where you're kind of like, what is this guy's background?
Yeah.
Just to cut it to the chase. He beats the shit out of Owen Wilson in a bathroom, but not in a way you would expect like a street brawler to do it. Like he's like punching him in the liver and like delivering knees to the chest. Like he's had some like combat training too.
It's James Bond-ish kind of beatdown, or Jason Bourne maybe. And then he has like other skills. He has computer hacking skills. He somehow takes over the office network of the Matthew Broderick character, right, Steven, and like plants this hidden video on everyone's computer. He's kind of given all these superpowers, which makes him, again, it's just harder to forgive him for doing bad things when he seems so competent.
And the charitable explanation is that he learned all this stuff watching TV.
I guess.
But that doesn't really make sense. Do you want to walk through the plot of the first act?
Yeah, let's dive right in.
All right.
Stephen Kovacs, played by Matthew Broderick, just asked his girlfriend Robin, played by Leslie Mann, to marry him. Instead of saying yes, she kicked him out of the house, so now he's moving into a new apartment. When Chip the Cable Guy, played by Jim Carrey, shows up to install Steven's cable, It's immediately clear that Chip is an obnoxious and manipulative weirdo. Steven offers Chip $50 to hook him up with free premium channels, which he does, but Chip simultaneously shames Steven into agreeing to do what Chip wants, which is to go on an outing together to the big satellite dish on the hill overlooking the city. After their night out, Chip thinks he and Steven are friends, while Steven alternates between appreciating Chip's relationship advice and being repulsed by Chip's egregious behavior. Chip then shows up at Steven's friend group basketball game and embarrasses him with his over-aggressive play. Then, when Steven gets Robin to come over to watch a movie, Chip sabotages their date by disconnecting the cable, and in exchange for turning it back on, Chip makes Steven agree to go on another outing together. On that date, Chip takes Steven to medieval times, where Chip has bribed the staff to make Chip and Steven fight a violent, armed duel with each other in the arena. Back at home that night, Steven sees that Chip has installed a deluxe new entertainment system in Steven's apartment without his knowledge. Steven insists that Chip has to take all the gear back, but Chip gets him to agree to host a little party first. At the party, a girl comes on to Steven, and he hooks up with her, only to find out in the morning she was a prostitute that Chip had hired. Steven is furious with Chip.
Where is Chip getting the money to bribe the medieval times staff, hire prostitutes, run this weird fake cable company business?
He doesn't even have an actual job. I guess he's hooking up cable and he's taking in $50 at a time, but
I guess he's stealing shit too, because he gets all
that's
that
true.
Stolen equipment. I guess he's got a fence and he steals stuff from people he doesn't like and sells it. But if you just got your cable installed and then a bunch of your shit's missing, I feel like it's kind of a straight line to draw.
But this guy's never given his real name. We find out by the end.
True.
He's been working under pseudonyms for years.
We never find out his real name. It's Kaiser Soze, I think.
Probably.
So let's talk about Matthew Broderick a little, because he's kind of the anchor of this movie, trying to tether it to reality to some degree. Do you think it works? How'd you feel about him in this movie?
No, I don't think it works. They make him like the normal average guy, which you would understand in a comedy you need a sympathetic hero, but they made him so normal that like nothing in particular stands out about his personality. So you like, here comes the weird character, and you're supposed to have a moment where you go, uh-oh, the guy that I like has this problem that I know about, or like hang up, and oh no, a guy just stepping into frame has the worst possible character trait. Sparks are gonna fly when the two of these guys come together. And it's not. It's just, here's the most plain normal guy who has no qualities you can actually pick out, and now the weirdest guy is gonna jump into his life, but it's an unequal balance.
He's a generic protagonist. He has no memorable traits, and I don't think the performance is that good either. I don't think Broderick is the right guy for this role. I couldn't help but think how much better Stiller would have been in that role, because he could tap into like the impotent fury that you need the Steven character to feel by the end of this movie.
Yes.
Like we kind of see it. I feel like Meet the Parents, the titular Fokker, Greg, in that movie is kind of similar to Stephen Kovacs in the sense that like he's very mild-mannered and kind of milquetoast, but terrible things keep happening to him and he eventually kind of snaps. But when he snaps, you believe it. I don't think Broderick has that level to his acting. He can't turn it up that way.
Or he couldn't figure out how to bring it. I totally agree with you. Stiller would have been more dynamic because he just would have brought more to this. I feel like it's not necessarily Broderick's shortcomings as an actor, but he was too honest, or like he didn't want to insert himself into this, which again, I think is the gravity that Jim Carrey exerted on this film. When he came in, it was like, let's just change things to suit Jim Carrey. And Broderick kind of realized that. And he's like, I'm just going to read the words that are written in the scene. Half the time they don't make sense, like the motivations flip-flops constantly for no discernible reason. So he's left reading these lines really pretty flat, except for later in the movie I'll talk about where I think he felt emboldened to ramp up his emotions, and I felt it for one scene. But yeah, other than that, he's pretty flat and kind of nonsensical.
I think the reason you cast Matthew Broderick in anything is for his sincerity and his earnestness. So if those weren't pluses for this character, then it's bad casting in my opinion.
Yeah.
Also, he's just not a good person. Like he's pretty selfish and kind of shitty.
But that's a comedy hero should be selfish or somehow short-sighted and flawed at the beginning. And
but he doesn't go on a journey.
He doesn't at all. Yeah, that's the problem. He doesn't have enough flaws and he doesn't go on a journey to fix them. He doesn't get in trouble because of them. You know, like it's okay, maybe your flaw of your comic hero is that he's too much of a pushover. And then so when a big pushy obnoxious guy comes into his life, he's too weak to stand his ground. And then trouble ensues and he has to learn to stand up to the obnoxious guy. But that's not the journey of Steven. You know, actually Steven ends up being stronger than you think he's going to be at points, both mentally and physically, because you don't expect that based on the way he's been acting for most of the movie.
Yeah, you'd expect Jim Carrey just to overpower him physically too, because he towers over him.
And just because it doesn't work for the plot, just like with these times, you're like, oh, sometimes he likes Chip, and sometimes he's just way too gracious about things that he should be pushed far beyond his limits way earlier. And he just keeps going, oh, but maybe I will hang out with you. I had fun. Like, why did you have fun? That wasn't fun what you just did.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Steven calls a cable company to come install his cable. Somehow Chip Douglas, who does not work for any cable company, intercepts this call or finds out about this appointment and swoops in on it before the actual cable company can get there. But then the cable company never shows up themselves?
Yeah, maybe that's an indictment of the real cable company guy not showing up was just coincidence. That's just commentary on the level of service of cable companies. And the rest of it is the
Chip
fact
was just counting on that. He's like, oh, there's like a 60-40 chance they just never show up.
They
just
call about it. They'll just forget about you. And then the other thing, like we know he's a super spy and a technical wizard, so he probably engineered the rest of the parts himself.
All right, that's fair. We talked a little bit about Chip. Was there anything about his characterization in this first section of the film that you wanted to go over?
I don't know. I was just like, he's too obnoxious from the get-go. Like the first thing you hear is him pounding on the door and yelling and then storming off. And it's like, we didn't deserve that. The character didn't deserve it. So it's like clear that this guy is terrible. And then he screams in the customer's face.
He calls him a jerk off.
He calls him a jerkwad or a jerk off or something, like literally yelling in his face. And who wouldn't slam the door on a cable guy? Even if you weren't tough, you would just be terrified at that point to have someone screaming in your face, and you would just lock the door and hope he would go away.
I wonder why they didn't try to like slow play it a little more. Because there are moments where Chip comes off as charming and gregarious. And like we said, he's got a good head on his shoulders. He could convince somebody to befriend him and then kind of gradually reveal his craziness.
Yeah.
That probably would have been a more effective, maybe like you would have missed some jokes in the early part of the movie that stem from his obnoxiousness. But those jokes didn't land for me anyway, so it's not really a loss.
One of the first wacky things he does once he gets into the apartment is do this whole sort of feeling up the wall and sensing where's the exact spot he's going to drill the hole to put the cable through. And that would have been funny and like a hair-raising twist if the guy had seemed normal up to that point, right? I let this guy in, he seemed like a normal guy, and holy shit, he's a weirdo. He's having sex with my wall. But he's already been beyond the pale 3 times before this happened. So it's kind of like, yeah, this is just the maniac that I let into my house, and this is what I'm in for.
So then, like we mentioned, they take him for the date at the Dish. It's such a strange proposal. I'd like to say that I would turn it down in real life, but I've never been in a position like that. I can't really say how I would react.
Yeah, I felt like that scene, and then what follows after that is where Chip shows up at the basketball game, and they both achieve a level of discomfort that points out something interesting about how it's hard to not be nice in social situations. To me, that was some of the interesting commentary that the comedy could pull out. Now, it's not that fun, but I wanted to give them credit for there. Like, oh, that felt kind of real. Like someone is like, so there's no problem, so let's go do this thing. And you're like, I don't really want to do it, but
can't think of a good reason to say no.
I feel like there's been a generational reaction to that. And like doing things with people or letting people into your space or your life is much more guarded by younger generations.
They call it emotional labor.
Yeah, there's words for it. There's expectations that the default reaction is, no, I don't do social things unless it's absolutely necessary. But at the 90s, I think this would have been even more relatable. That if someone acts nice to you, then it's impossible to not be nice to them.
So you're saying the 90s in America was a lot like Canada of today, just people being nice to each other. Must have been nice.
Carrey's Canadian, isn't he? Maybe that's the explanation.
Yeah, the basketball scene I thought was one of the more effective sequences in this movie for comedic value, only because if you've played any amount of pickup basketball, like you will run into guys like Chip who are just way too competitive. But I love the tidbit that apparently they showed up to film the scene and it was immediately clear that Jim Carrey couldn't even dribble a basketball convincingly.
Oh, wow.
So they just had him do his moves and then CGI'd in a basketball in post-production.
Little production expense that maybe they weren't counting on, doing special effects in that scene.
I don't want to be reductive, but you're getting paid $20 million, man. Why don't you fucking practice dribbling a basketball for a couple weeks?
Yeah. I was just reading about John Wick production and everybody was in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons for 6 months before the movie started. Like, send this guy to basketball camp for a long weekend.
If Sandler was playing that role, he would have been all up in there. That guy loves basketball.
He would have loved it.
I think his last 3 movies have been basketball related in some way.
But there's a good laugh. One of the few laughs, actually laughed both times I watched this movie. I did go through 2 full watches of it. When Chip jumps off Jack Black's back, that's hard to say, and dunks, big 2-handed dunk, shatters the rim, and they do this slow-mo shouting face as he brings the rim down and the glass all around him. And I couldn't help but laugh. I was like, that was a well-executed joke.
Another funny tidbit about this movie production is that the pyrotechnic guy who was in charge of the backboard fucked up. The glass was supposed to break and fly forward, not backwards records everyone. And so when Carrey or the stunt double, whoever landed on the ground, there was actual glass all over like where he was supposed to land, and it was supposed to fly the other way. So he got fired on the spot.
Oh, shit. It looks good on film, though.
It does. Yeah, it's a great shot.
It may have endangered the actors unnecessarily, but it looks great.
Let's talk about Robin a little bit and the date she has with Steven in this section, because this is kind of the first glimpse we're getting. We're seeing her and Steven interact in person for the first time now.
Yes, this is the quote unquote date where he like says, come over and watch Sleepless in Seattle.
And we don't really get a lot of information about why she rejected his proposal. And also, like, rejecting someone's proposal is one thing, but she clearly is not done with him. Why kick him out? It's a strange place in their relationship where we meet them.
It's kind of a tortured scenario because the reasons don't really line up. Rick, the friend, drops a hint, says, oh, you shouldn't have proposed to her, buddy. You're the mad smotherer. And it's like, is that a thing? Like, they never establish any particulars of why this guy made his girlfriend so uncomfortable that when he proposed, she's like, you gotta leave.
Get the fuck out of my house. Yeah.
But in a couple weeks, I'll come over and watch movies with you on the couch.
And she's going on dates. Like, I can't parse what they're saying. It feels more like bad writing than it does like a character choice.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they put enough thought and care into the Robin character.
No.
She comes off as kind of an asshole.
Yeah, or just
thoughtless, at least careless.
Thoughtless,
like,
yeah.
Kind of casually cruel at times to Steven, but like, also he kind of sucks too.
No, and I forgive Leslie Mann because she's just stunning in this movie. And I knew her later movies, Knocked Up and then Funny People, which we covered on the show. This is 40, obviously. She's middle-aged by the time of some of those, which are 10, 15 years after this movie. And I knew her as like the hot mom. And then I see her at this age, I'm like, wow, stunning. Good for you, Judd Apatow.
Yeah, I guess she'd done some other stuff. I'm looking, but like The Cable Guy was definitely her first big role. She was in Bottle Rocket, which is a movie I really enjoy, but as sorority girl, so clearly not a big role. But this is how she met her future husband.
Oh, this is when they first met. Wow.
Yeah, Judd.
Well, that's kind of makes it special and fun. That makes the movie better.
Yeah.
Better.
It does.
For me somehow.
Something real came out of it that
wholesome.
was good. Something to root for. So then they go to Medieval Times. Ian, I have to ask, have you ever been to Medieval Times? That's not an old joke. I'm saying, have you ever been to the restaurant Medieval Times?
I have, in fact, dined at Medieval Times.
Yes. It's so much fun. John Tidbit time. My wife was 9 months pregnant with my son, Jackson. All our birthdays are in the first 12 days in June. Me, my wife, my son, and my daughter are all born between June 2nd and June 12th. So for my birthday, I was like, I kind of want to go to Medieval Times. My wife is literally ready to pop. I think we went on like June 5th and he was born on June 7th. But I was like, man, it would be so cool if you went into labor at Medieval Times and just gave birth. Because I assume it's like a sovereign nation. Like you get dual citizenship for both America and Medieval Times in Edison, New Jersey.
And not to mention the king would announce it. The heralds would blow their horns. It would be quite an extravaganza.
You'd probably get unlimited Pepsi refills for life. Something cool like that.
He gets the little scepter that gets him into any Medieval Times.
They still probably would not let him get onto the dirt and duel somebody else because that just seems wildly unsafe. But I'm sure he'd have some perks and privileges.
I'm sure.
So this is a very far-fetched little sequence here. Literally, Chip, he must have bribed them like $40,000 because this place is going to be shut down immediately after this happens.
It starts out as a good idea because taking somebody on a second date, like to the extent that Steven and Chip's relationship resembles dating, this is their second date, and to take somebody to Medieval Times, it's like funny. It's primed for humor. But then
I don't see why it's funny. I think it's a great place.
I'm sorry.
You can get a Mountain Dew and mead. It's called a bee sting. It's delicious.
So the problem comes when they said, oh, let's heighten this. Wouldn't it be funny if they fought in the arena? And first of all, not really. And second of all, why would they? There's literally no motivation. They're not antagonistic at this point. It'd be one thing if this was the culmination of things had come to a head between them and they were having an argument and then it spilled out into give them swords and let them duel. They're actually pretty friendly. Steven is maybe trying to tell Chip he wants to break up, but they actually underplay that so thoroughly in the script that you're almost not sure that they're trying to play that beat. And then they're just fighting. And like we hinted at earlier, Steven is somehow much stronger than Chip. And every time that they actually clash, he like throws him to the dirt or smashes him to the ground. Not explained. It's all just kind of weird stuff. It's like a bit that's looking for an excuse to happen and never finds it.
Yeah, it's a really good point that at this stage of the movie, they're getting along pretty well. You could argue maybe Chip is feeling spurned because he had to blackmail Steven into going on this date in the first place. But I get the sense that doesn't bother him. It seems like it's how he gets most of his social calendar filled. It's always a tit for tat situation with him.
Yeah, and he's so happy to be there. He's reveling in the stupid language. He's talking to the waitress.
Nice Janine Garofalo cameo.
And he's just having a blast. Yeah, and it's very tough to get through the fight because their point of view, neither one locks in because they're not really mad. They're just kind of going through the motions.
Chip's mad in the sense that he's insane, not in the sense that he's angry.
And you would think that Steven would get mad because his life is being threatened in all these dangerous ways. He's forced to get on a horse and fucking joust after being pummeled with a Morning Star. And yet, in the end, because they needed to not put a big stop sign in the relationship, he goes, oh, that was fun. I'm glad we did that.
He says, let's do it again next week.
Oh, does he? That's insane.
It's fucking insane. I could not believe that he was on board with this shit. Like, I was so shocked when they get back to the apartment and they're like, yeah, that was pretty cool. Get the fuck out of here. I would have either beaten you to death or filed a restraining order. Those are the only two outcomes I would have ever partaken in after this night.
We lose faith in this character because he's not acting like a person would in this situation. So it's frustrating.
So then we move on to another. You guys are probably getting a little nervous because of how long we've been talking about this first act. This is like most of the movie and most of the story. They're really doing their work to set up the eventual falling out between the two characters. Maybe too much work. It's not a long movie, but I think we could have used more gradual buildup as opposed to starting him at 100 and then having him pull off the gas like we said.
And it's more, I think, Carrey-itis of this film. There's like, we got Jim Carrey. Let's spitball more crazy set pieces and big action scenes we can put together. We're going to do Medieval Times. We're going to do an old people karaoke party. And we're going to have Jim Carrey sing and it'll be really obnoxious and funny. And that was the worst part.
You really didn't like the performance of Somebody to Love.
Oh my God. He sings this Jefferson Airplane song. First of all, I never liked Jefferson Airplane, so maybe I'm biased coming into this.
But they built this city.
They did.
Well, that's Jefferson Starship, isn't it?
Yeah, they had evolved. They had become a starship by that point.
It's the same band, isn't it?
It's like an evolution of the same band. I don't really know who stayed.
Like an Audio Slave and Rage Against the Machine situation.
And it's 25 years apart or something. Like these people might have retired by that point. I think. I don't know. We have to check our dates on that. But this is...
I don't give a shit. We're not checking anything.
Somebody to Love is like a full-on flower power 60s song, I think. And God, Carrey leans into it. And I had just like a physical reaction to trying to sit through that scene. It was harder for me to sit through than the entire movie Malignant. It was just like so wanted to not be there.
I think I give Carrey some credit for his performance in that scene because he doesn't speak with a lisp ordinarily, but his character does. And he's singing with a lisp in this scene. And he's in key for most of it, which is pretty impressive. I thought that I was like, oh, he's a better singer than I expected.
Yeah, they like released this. They put this as a song on the soundtrack.
That's a bridge too far.
They thought he committed to it so hard, but he did commit to it.
That's his thing, though. He commits. Like,
yeah,
you know, who's surprised by that?
I just wish he wouldn't have in this particular case.
And then there's the prostitute Heather.
Yeah,
who was she meant to look like Winona Ryder? Like they made her look like such a '90s like all indie girl.
I didn't connect that, but now that you say, yeah,
they really. Which, to be fair, like if you were trying to lure '90s Matthew Broderick, that's who you would use. But the scene, I don't know where I landed on. He's really upset when he finds out about it, and he doesn't really give a good reason why.
Even if she hadn't been a prostitute, you can kind of see the setup coming, right? Because you go, oh, Chip's pushing him together with this girl, and then he's taking Polaroids. Obviously, he's going to use this as ammunition to blackmail Steven later.
She's the only young, attractive person at a karaoke party full of old people.
Full of old people. It's all Chip's preferred customers who he's bought off with free HBO.
That's a good bit by the writers, though, that I'm just realizing now is that old people are lonely and would like indulge Chip way more than young people.
I still don't want to see him sing karaoke. But fair point. And then there's this big blow up. I liked the writing of the reveal, the actually specifics, how it leaked out, where Chip's like, this one's on me. And he's like, what's on you? I thought that was clever. But then Steven has this big blow up, supposedly, at Chip. But as we said, Broderick has a hard time mustering any real emotion in this movie. And he doesn't kind of make it play real in this scene.
It like zoom cuts in on his face and you expect him to be like, get the fuck out of my house. But he's just like, get out of my house.
Yeah.
Like very, I Will Never Doubt You from Miami Vice, like very similar delivery.
Just like, I was told to say this line forcefully.
Yeah.
Here's my union mandated line reading.
All right. Was there anything else from this section we needed to go over, or is it time to move on to section 2?
Let's move out of medieval times and into modern times and see what happens next.
Hoping to patch things up with Steven, Chip works on reuniting him with Robin. Chip goes to a restaurant where Robin is on a date with a new guy. Chip ambushes the guy in the bathroom, beats the shit out of him, and warns him to never see Robin again. Then Chip shows up at Robin's apartment and installs a premium cable package, implying falsely that it's a gift from Steven. As a result, Robin calls up Steven and wants to get back together, because ladies love free cable. Steven is thrilled, but when he finds out Chip had a hand in it, he cuts off their friendship for good. So Chip takes his revenge. He gets Steven arrested for possession of the entertainment system, which turns out was stolen goods. Then he gets Steven fired from his job by circulating a hidden camera video of Steven mocking his boss. Finally, Chip ingratiates himself with Steven's family and manages to embarrass and provoke Steven into violence at a family dinner, alienating Steven from his entire family and Robin too. The Owen Wilson of it all. We get our nice Owen Wilson cameo in this section.
Yeah.
Apparently his name is Ray. He doesn't get a name in the movie, but in the novelization, he's Ray.
Oh, interesting. That's some deep research you did there. Because, yeah, he's called Robin's date.
Kind of a doucheburger.
But barely. I feel like they didn't go hard enough. They made him weird because there's one moment.
What's the deal with that chicken guy?
Yeah, he calls the waiter over and he goes, "What's up with the chicken? Are you waiting for it to hatch some eggs?" And so he's kind of rude for a second, but then he finishes that line by saying, "I'm sorry to bother you with this."
He was being sarcastic.
Okay, maybe I
sorry. He was like, "I'm asking you to do your job. I'm sorry, I'm putting you out." I definitely read that he was being a dick the entire time to the waiter.
Oh, okay.
And also, he does some dicky things to Robin that are kind of sneaky dicky.
Okay.
Sneaky dicky.
That should have been the character's name.
Like when he asks her about her job and then she starts talking, and before she even gets a sentence out, he goes, "Hold on, I'm going to go to the bathroom."
Oh, that's true.
He's checking the boxes. Like, you're supposed to ask questions, but he doesn't really care.
But you've made a lot more sense of his performance, and I see those are all good points that those were engineered to make him more of a dick. I was just more confused. I was like, this is another character who's like flip-flopping and also cutting scenes short because the movie has business to get through. So he's like, okay, now I got to go to the bathroom because Jim Carrey's got to beat me up.
I think you were just disarmed by Owen Wilson's inherent likability. Like, he doesn't play a lot of villains or bad guys.
That's a good point.
So you probably, and this was early enough in his career where he didn't have that preconceived notion about him yet. But
okay,
by this point, and for your first time watching it, you're like, oh, Owen Wilson, he's going to be like a silly little kind of a ditzy guy, but mostly good-hearted. But no, he was still taking on some other roles at this point.
Great point. I'm sure that was at work in my head, and that's why I got more confused.
But that's the beating is, like we mentioned, kind of shockingly brutal, right?
Yes. Even if you've absorbed all of his douchery, like, okay, this guy sucks, he did not deserve to be beaten down Jason Bourne style and nearly shot in the head. Like, you were afraid he was not going to survive this beating.
The fight, it's not really a fight, it's a beatdown. But yeah, it starts with some mostly comedic interactions, like mussing his hair with some stuff from the bathroom attendant's little caddy, or plucking his eyebrows and his nose hairs. But then he just escalates just beating the shit out of him.
Yes.
Doesn't he kick him in the face when he's on the ground at some point?
He gets him pretty bad, but let me suggest that it doesn't quite start that innocently. Messing his hair is in the middle of the fight. The fight starts with Jim Carrey popping up behind him and smashing his head down into the toilet and fucking drowning him for 10 seconds until he lets him up and then proceeds to do these other creative beatdowns.
And you could say it's going for heightened comedy, but in that moment, we have to believe that Chip Douglas is some kind of Dracula, because Owen Wilson closes the bathroom stall door.
Yes.
And less than a second later, Chip stands up behind him. He could not have slithered under that door that fast.
No, he has mystical powers.
He phased through that door like a Dracula.
He did. He was kind of being a Dracula there.
Does he show up in the mirror? Do we get a shot?
Oh, shit.
Is Chip Douglas a Dracula?
A new reading of this movie. I did kind of feel like Chip is semi-supernatural in this. And there are comedies where you have a really weird character who you push so heightened that the rules start to be kind of fairy tale rules. And you could almost use that to explain some of the ways Steven deals with them. And Steven knows that he's in a fairy tale universe. And once you're dealing with the genie, like, you're in the shit and you got to go with it. You can't just be a normal person and slam the door and call the cops. You've got to live with this. But they don't fully go there. This is not a genie. This is not a supernatural puckish trickster. He's just like, for a joke, he's able to phase through the wall.
Yeah, well said. The movie it's straining for comedy, I feel like, at times.
Yeah.
Like, the story it wants to tell isn't funny, but they were like, we got to make some jokes happen.
Right.
So it's like you said, the medieval times scene is a bit looking for a purpose, and this is a movie just looking for bits. That's kind of my reading of it. It's like, well, it would be kind of funny if he just popped up behind him for no reason.
Yeah, and it kind of was, but just like with the other big over-the-top action moments afterwards, like dunking the basketball, like having a literal jousting match and no one getting hurt, you're like, what is this reality? What am I supposed to make of this movie? Once those things happen, It leaves you unsettled.
So then he gets arrested and he's in jail, and his attorney shows up, and it's none other than Chip Douglas. Now going by Larry Tate. Is that when he reveals his other name?
He drops another name, which is just to seed this bit that he's been using TV names.
He does a nipples on the glass bit from Midnight Run, which is, sure, more references.
I missed that one until you pointed it out to me, but it makes sense now. Chip has so much power in this section of the movie where he's engineered Steven's downfall. It's kind of surreal, right? But okay, it's a comedy. The hero is trapped. He's helpless. Everything's against him. But it feels also outsized that Chip is able to torture him so thoroughly in these surreal ways. It's just an extension of his almost supernatural power to control the world.
It becomes fatiguing, I think, for the audience as much as it does for Steven, because it's just a lot of shit being rained down on this one guy that ostensibly you're supposed to root for, and with really very little reprieve until the ass end of the movie.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cruel. Like, the movie has a mean streak to it, and I know that's part of what has bolstered its reputation with some people, but I think a movie with a mean streak needs to work in some levity better than this one does. Like, even the laughs in this section are at Steven's expense for the most part.
It needs a sweet streak underneath to help balance it, and it doesn't. Like we said, the likable characters, or the characters that should have been likable, Steven and Robin maybe, end up being sort of neutral, chaotic neutral, and so nothing really great to hang on to.
So as viscerally as you hated the Somebody to Love performance, I hated the porno password family dinner party thing.
Okay, interesting.
I find that they fucked up too by making everyone in Steven's life so fucking terrible. His parents just come off like the biggest dickheads in this whole section, and you can attribute that to the power of Chip, his influence. But I'm like, why doesn't Steven just move 5,000 miles away and start over? His girlfriend sucks, his parents are terrible, his cable guy's stalking him. His only friend Rick is like a sulky little baby when he can't hang out with him.
Yeah. The parents are almost like bewitched under a spell. They are just so won over by Chip that they're going along with this really uncomfortable porno password game where he has to make his mom guess the word vagina and nipple, etc. And I was ready to give this scene a little bit of kudos because this was the one spot in the movie where I thought Matthew Broderick played real anger, real discomfort that felt like the character was being how this character should act, being humiliated in front of his family. And yeah, it didn't make sense why his family was such enthusiastic partners with Chip in this humiliation. But I was like, whoa, this is a different Steven in this scene. He is really uncomfortable. And I'm like, oh, actually, Matthew Broderick can act, and he's acting in this scene. I had to give him credit for that.
No, it's a good call out. He does register an emotion besides like childlike bewilderment in the scene, which is a big accomplishment for him. If that felt like fame praise, it was supposed to.
But it's an uncomfortable scene. It's not fun like many of the scenes in this movie.
Was there anything else from this section we needed to touch on before we move on to the ending?
That might be it. We might want to tune in to see how this wraps up.
Wrap it up.
At the end of his rope, Steven turns to his old best friend Rick, played by Jack Black, for some help. Rick does some research and finds out that Chip is a serial stalker who was fired by the cable company for harassing customers. Then Steven gets a disturbing call from Chip, who says he's getting together with Robin. Alarmed, Steven tracks down Chip and Robin up at the giant satellite dish. They have a fight, but Chip knocks Steven out and drags Robin to the top of a tall antenna tower. Steven then catches up to them and pleads with Chip to let her go. Chip breaks down in a speech about how he was raised by the television instead of his mom, and then he tries to commit suicide by jumping off the tower, but he survives. And ironically, Chip's fall manages to knock out cable TV for the entire city just at the exact moment everyone was tuned in to hear the verdict in a sensational televised trial. But overall, it's a happy ending. Steven and Robin are back together, and Chip has moved on to begin stalking the friendly paramedic who rescues him.
Strange ending.
It's a lot like everything else, and they managed to sort of wrap it up, but like you're bombarded with some real human jeopardy, attempted murder-suicide shit, and then a happy ending.
Yeah, real hand that rocks the cradle vibes from Chip in this section. But apparently Jim Carrey was adamant that Chip should be impaled on the big satellite dish and die. And I think Apatow wanted it too, because he was like, this character's irredeemable. And in order to redeem him, he needs to recognize that and sacrifice himself. But the studio wouldn't go for that. You know, as much as they gave them a lot of room to work with some dark ideas, that was a bridge too far. And I thought that was kind of funny that in the movie they have him fall right next to the big point that would have impaled him and look at it kind of like, yeah, be fucking kidding me. Because I was like, maybe that was just Jim Carrey's actual feeling at the time.
There's kind of a visual trick where the camera starts with a side-on view and it looks like the needle is going through him, and then it comes up and it's like, oh, he's fine.
That felt like a little in-joke on the studio because they wouldn't let him kill him. But yeah, I mean, this one's really just a big set piece for the most part.
Yeah.
At the satellite dish. Not a ton happens besides that.
There's like stages to the fight because first they're in the dish and she's hanging from a wire, which is kind of just disconcerting, like how threatening.
That happened? Yeah.
Yeah, and how he tied her up 20 feet off the ground with some kind of rope. And then they fight and Chip knocks Steven out cold for a minute in a 1-foot puddle of water. So like the guy could have basically been dead right there, except when they cut back to them, he's in 6 inches of water and he's breathing air and he comes around and then they chase to the top of another tower. There's a lot of action mechanics to this scene.
It's like the fucking scene in GoldenEye. It was a big like satellite dish fight in GoldenEye between Sean Bean and Pierce Brosnan.
Oh, that's explained. So I don't know if I ever saw GoldenEye, but doesn't Chip say this is just like GoldenEye? And Steven says, no, it's not. It's not a movie.
Weirdly, I thought GoldenEye came out after The Cable Guy. Like,
oh, spooky. They predicted.
Like, oh yeah, no, it was a 95 movie.
Okay. So that's another reference I didn't get. There's a lot of references in this. I got some of the older references because they name drop a bunch of shows.
A lot of sitcom stuff. Yeah.
A lot of sitcoms from like the 60s and 70s that I was seeing in reruns as a kid. Bewitched and Emergency 51. I actually like when Chip wakes up and realizes he's still alive, he mimics talking to the paramedics going, we're going to need an IV with D5W stat. That's what they would always say on Emergency 51, which is one of my favorite old TV shows that I watched in reruns as a kid.
Let's talk about the Sam Sweet trial a little bit. Did you feel like this was an effective kind of recurring joke throughout the movie? This sensationalized trial?
I felt like it was better than anything in this movie. Like I just wanted to watch Ben Stiller do a parody of a sensational TV trial because it was done in little moments, but it was like very deeply produced where just for a second on screen, there was sort of clips of the journals of the killer brother. And like, there was all this sort of texture to it. I'm like, oh, there's something good going on. And there's Ben Stiller's making like a good piece of parody. And we're only seeing it as this running gag through the movie as like, why is this trial happening in the background?
You pointed out that the OJ trial was still kind of fresh in people's minds.
Yeah.
I got some real Menendez brothers vibes from it, especially kind of like the sibling aspect. But then I did enjoy the little tidbit of the Eric Roberts starring made-for-TV movie. Do you remember what it was called?
No.
Ben Stiller's great at like fake trailers and fake movies because Tropic Thunder really leaned into that hard. And the Ben Stiller show also did as well.
Yeah, he's good. And that's why like when these parts came on, I'm like, it didn't make sense why this was a running thing that kept cutting away to TVs showing like the latest updates on the trial. I'm like, why did they invest so much effort in it? And at the end, it's so ironic because Chip's fall cuts off the cable right when people are trying to hear the verdict. And that's kind of an indictment of us, all of us who were busy watching celebrity trials in the 90s. But it's kind of like, what was the point? That kind of wasn't the point of the movie, was indicting people for watching television. This was a movie about a weirdo and
obsession. Yeah.
And a romance. Yeah.
But it did inspire Kyle Gass to pick up a book, start reading.
Yes. That was heavy-handed and obviously meant to be silly that the moment the TV goes off, this guy is like, what's this on my nightstand? A book? I'm going to begin to read.
Yeah, he looks at it like it's an alien artifact. Kind of rich coming from a movie made by a bunch of people who made their living making TV by and large. But I did want to call out that the little Eric Roberts cameo was a godsend because it gives us our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh.
Our boy Eric had a recurring role as a DEA agent. Actually, he was only in one episode. As a DEA agent on Justified. He's like kind of the ghost of Christmas Future for our hero Raylan Givens. He's an old, divorced, lonely DEA agent who's kind of burned all his bridges because he's focused on just catching the bad guys by any means necessary and kind of askew to personal life for his whole career.
I could totally picture Eric Roberts in that role.
Yeah, he killed it. And I also thought it was kind of a fun Ghost of Christmas Future situation for Timothy Olyphant. It's like, hey, if you agree to every role, you could be Eric Roberts in 15 years. Stay picky, Timmy. We don't want you going down that path. So that's the ending. Any other notes from this section that you wanted to go over?
No, I was glad it was over. It was exhausting.
It is. It's not the worst movie we've covered, but it's just doesn't know what it wants to do. It's a little confused.
Yeah.
And I think it's a misunderstanding of what people like about Jim Carrey. Like Lloyd Christmas, Ace Ventura, Stanley Ipkiss, whatever his character's name was in Liar Liar. They're like all kind of good-natured, flawed characters who are like goofy, but not vindictive and mean.
Yeah.
So like they tried to apply that same kind of goofiness to a character who's almost pure evil.
Yeah, they just got lost. I think it was like they had a lot of forces, one of them being, we got Jim Carrey, the biggest comedy star in the world. And I'm like, okay, we got to make biggest use of him. And they lost the thread on how to make this a movie with characters that you care about and you're willing to follow through to the end. And they just poured on heavy on the shtick and it just became exhausting.
Yeah. Do you want to hear what Jim Carrey got up to after this this movie?
Yeah.
He retired.
Oh.
He never made a movie again.
That's so weird. I could have sworn. I've seen him since 1996.
You might think so, but no. No, of course, I'm joking. So he was kind of, I like to say that this was kind of the beginning of his downslope in his career. He had The Mask and Dumb and Dumber, which were both big hits commercially and critically. People loved them. But then he put in a widely hated performance as the Riddler in Batman Forever, a performance I loved when I was like 8, but it hasn't aged great. And adults at the time really hated it because he's, as Tommy Lee Jones famously said about his performance as the Riddler, I cannot sanction your buffoonery. It's one of my favorite put downs. Like, I try to use it as often as I can, but it doesn't come up that much. Yeah, because Jim Carrey flat out asked Tommy Lee Jones why he hates him so much, because apparently he was a real dick to him during the filming.
That's hilarious.
By and large, I think Carrey seems like a nice guy in his personal life, so I don't want to drag him too much for this movie. He's an actor making choices. It's not like he's a bad person. I just didn't like his performance here. So then he made this, which was obviously mixed reviews at the time, and audience turnout was a lot lower than expected. So then he made Liar Liar in 1997, the following year. That was seen as a return to form, a movie that's still remembered pretty fondly, I think, of people from my generation. And then The Truman Show showed him trying to take a more dramatic role, and it mostly worked, I think. The Truman Show, at the time, people wrote it off as like, who wants to watch a show about people living their real lives? Like, that'll never work.
Yeah, sounds ridiculous.
Just a couple years later, reality TV boom was underway, and Truman Show seemed more prescient than ever.
Yeah.
Also, super good weirdo Ed Harris performance in that, dressed like Steve Jobs.
Oh, okay. I never saw that one. I'm just realizing as we're going through his filmography how much Jim Carrey I skipped over the years because of some kind of prejudice against him.
I would definitely recommend The Truman Show to you.
Okay.
It's a movie I quite enjoy. So then he did Me, Myself, and Irene, which reunited him with the Farrelly brothers. That's a movie that I think is pretty funny. And then 2003's Bruce Almighty. I would say that's his last big pure comedy hit. He started doing some more dramatic roles, and even his comedy roles had kind of, in the sense of Adam McKay still makes movies that are funny, but they all have an agenda and kind of a side thing going on. Those are the kind of movies he seemed to be gravitating towards. Like Fun with Dick and Jane is about white collar criminals, like in suburbia, stuff like that. He wasn't just going for laughs anymore. There was kind of an agenda behind his choices. In 2004, he did Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is just a triumph of a dramatic performance by him and Kate Winslet. He tried to do some horror stuff with The Number 23, didn't quite work. It's a movie I respect but don't enjoy. And then he reprised the role of Lloyd Christmas in 2014's fucking dog shit Dumb and Dumber 2.
Oh.
Of course, 2 spelled T-O.
Yeah.
And has been just killing it playing Dr. Robotnik in the Sonic the Hedgehog movies ever since.
Oh.
He's fucking awesome as Dr. Robotnik.
That's cool.
But I think he said he's done with the franchise, and he might retire from acting, he said. So we'll see.
Yeah. The only things I've seen him when he's popped up in public life in recent years has been to like talk about the meaning of existence. And
yeah, he's very into existentialism lately.
Yeah. So that makes him interesting to me more so than when he was just clowning around. And certainly Eternal Sunshine, that alone on his resume makes his movie career much more substantial in my eyes.
I also think a movie that's kind of forgotten nowadays that is an interesting study in Jim Carrey's performance is Man on the Moon, his Andy Kaufman biopic.
Yes.
Which we can cover if we want to. That was a huge bomb.
I would like that. There's a lot there for me to unpack because I was always put off by Andy Kaufman because I'd only experienced him as a very young person and I couldn't possibly understand what he was trying to do because it's nearly impossible even as an old person.
No, it has nothing to do with your age.
And then in recent years, I became a fan of Andy Kaufman. And then obviously Jim Carrey was such a huge fan that he absolutely just got into character as hard as Andy Kaufman ever did.
Really embodied his chaos.
So that's cool. I would love to spend some more time with that movie.
All right, great. I'll throw it on the schedule for the near future. Matthew Broderick tried his hand as a big budget monster movie leading man with 1998's Roland Emmerich directed Godzilla.
Yeah.
Man, I'm a Godzilla fan and I fucking hate that movie.
Yeah, you're more sensitive to the quality of the Godzillas that come out.
It was widely hated, I would say. It made money, but nobody went to see it twice. He'd star in some big movies like The Stepford Wives, The Producers, and Tower Heist, but he's been doing a lot of work on TV in more recent years. He's been in Better Things, The Conners. He had a recurring role as Cooter Beaver in 30 Rock, and he was in Louie for a couple episodes. So, yeah, he seems like he's married to Sarah Jessica Parker, who I think is making crazy money to reprise the Sex and the City role. So he's probably just chilling, being a house husband, hopefully hiring a chauffeur to take him around.
For me, Matthew Broderick's home base and where he always should come back to is like Neil Simon plays and movie adaptations thereof. Like he seems so at home in that world. Like he was just born to do that. And then he branched out and had to have a regular Hollywood career, but nothing else really ever kind of resonated as strongly as those things. And then obviously Ferris Bueller, which I feel like is some extension of that
it's
genre of comedy.
Yeah. I think he was really good in Election, the Alexander Payne movie Election. collection.
That's true.
But yeah, I just think he has a narrower range than people think. There's a few types of roles he's really good for, and I don't really like him in anything else other than those.
But now that we mentioned the good ones, they're awesome. So don't focus on this movie, folks. Go watch his good stuff.
We kind of gave a little bit of a rundown of Leslie Mann's career, but we'll run it back a little bit for you. She's been a fixture in comedic movies. It's kind of crazy to think for almost 30 years now. She's been popping up in like some of the biggest comedies of generations. She was in Big Daddy, so that's like still in the 90s. She had a pretty sizable role in that. Orange County, she reunited with Jack Black for that one.
Okay.
40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, Funny People, and This Is 40. So that's most notable comedies. Throw a couple in there and she's pretty much covered all the bases. And she's done some dramatic roles. You can argue about whether or not they were successful because they're both going to be upcoming episodes. Welcome to Marwen and Motherless Brooklyn.
Looking forward to those.
And she most recently popped up, though, in a movie you quite enjoyed, Cha Cha Real Smooth, and The Bubble, which was on Netflix, and I didn't watch because it looked terrible.
Okay, yeah, she didn't have a big part in Cha Cha, but I do remember it fondly. I think she plays the main character's mom, and they have some cool scenes together.
The main character, who is played by Cooper Raiff, who wrote the movie and directed it, and he was just like, yeah, I'm going to write myself into a role where I get to make out with Dakota Johnson. You know,
yeah, smart guy, man. Yeah. He's not only making money in Hollywood, he's lining himself up.
I think in this next movie, Ana de Armas is going to play this girl who's really into me. It's like when Jon Favreau directed Chef, and his two love interests were Sofia Vergara and Scarlett Johansson.
How do you make that happen?
I realized we skipped over the director of this movie, who is a name you should all know, Ben Stiller. But we're only going to talk about him as a director because he doesn't act really in this movie, and covering his acting career would take forever. And we will cover him as an actor in the future.
Okay.
This was his second directorial effort. I always forget he directed Reality Bites, which he was one of the stars of, but also really good Ethan Hawke performance in that one.
I got to go back to that.
Young Ethan Hawke, looking all snackable. So he wouldn't direct another movie for 5 years, and that would be Zoolander, which flopped at the time, but obviously is now beloved and one of the most quotable comedies, and features a Justin Theroux cameo.
Did it flop enough that we can cover it?
Zoolander? I'm fairly certain it did, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's a big juicy one.
Came out on 9/11.
Oh, bad timing.
I think people were going to the movies. Actually came out September 28th.
Okay.
All right, it's very much borderline. It had a $28 million budget and made $60 million. So I think we can swing that. I would just love to talk about Zoolander. The movie's very special to me. But why male models? Anytime somebody asks me to repeat something, I go, are you serious? I just told you. David Duchovny. It's a much better role for him than Evolution.
Yes. We like to highlight these people in their peaks sometimes and not just in their valleys.
He would then direct Tropic Thunder, which was a pretty decent return at the box office, but became a huge phenomenon on DVD and Blu-ray.
Yes.
And like I mentioned, is worth watching just for the fake movie trailers we get, because there's so many good ones in there.
Yeah.
Fake movie posters. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which I'm going to start calling Beau is Not Afraid, because Beau is Afraid just looks like the fucked up Ari Aster version of The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. He also directed Zoolander 2, unfortunately.
Okay.
The movie's not very good. And then he directed all the episodes of the excellent miniseries from Showtime, Escape from Dannemora, which I've praised before for Benicio del Toro and Paul Dano's performances.
I got to put that on my short list. I watched like the first episode or two of that and then somehow just forgot to go back. But I was like, this show is freaky good and disturbing and cool.
It's awesome. Really well done. And he directed 6 out of 9 episodes of Severance. I had no idea. So he's crushing it in TV.
Yeah, he's rocking.
He's a good director. I know Severance gets a lot of praise for some of the directorial choices in their episodes. And Escape from Dannemora might not seem flashy, but it's a really interesting balancing act he has to pull off there.
I got to finish both those because I started Severance too. And I'm like, this is fucking cool and weird. And I forgot to finish it. I got homework.
I've heard great things about the finale, but I haven't checked it out yet.
It got a lot of buzz when that season came to an end. And I was like, I'm missing out.
Well, that's the Cable Guy. Thank you guys for listening. We're going to do one I promised you we would do a few weeks ago. We're going back to the 90s.
Reveling in it.
And we're doing a childhood favorite of mine that I have not watched in many years, and I'm sure it's fucking horrible. It is the Wesley Snipes skydiving criminals thriller Drop Zone.
Wow.
A movie that was just trying to do for skydiving what Point Break did for surfing and failed miserably.
I'm ready to get dropped because I don't even remember this existing. So this is going to be a real retro flashback for me to a place I've never been.
I'm excited to just revisit some 90s Wesley Snipes because he was just on fire in that decade. And he's come back from his tax troubles in a really admirable way. He's fucking hilarious in What We Do in the Shadows. He popped up.
Oh my gosh. I didn't realize
that.
That's cool.
So he's on the comeback trail. Let's give him some shine. So thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod. Email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter @blastzonepod for any movie recommendations, feedback, suggestions. Just want to tell Ian how nice and syrupy his voice is.
Always open for that.
And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
Blast Zone.